because there's more than one son really being discussed there are two. And we mentioned this morning that it's really reflective of a whole host of different things that go on that could keep us from relating to God or following Jesus and being what we ought to be. And so those two sons had their two different ways of following and then not following and leaving the path. And Galatians 5 we mentioned just briefly this morning about all the different works of the flesh. And any one of those things, along with things that we would think would be less than other sins, but they're all sins that take us away from God and can leave us outside of our relationship, and nobody wants that. I want to come back and look at the parable and mention two things. One, I just learned tonight talking with Craig in the meeting we were having a few minutes ago. And another one, just a what if. Now, we read the parable this morning, so I'm going to take it that most of you have read it at least once or twice, maybe this morning, and maybe several times. And you remember the incident where the son finally discovers, after he's in the middle of the pig pen, that he hadn't eaten as good as the pigs are. And he's wanting something, and it dawns on him. He came to himself, is what Jesus describes it. We talked about that this morning some. And then he goes home. And when he gets back home to his father, he rehearses what he's talking about. And I can visualize as he's headed back down to, I'm going to talk to my father, and I'm going to tell him I'm not worthy. And he starts in on this. But I want you to back up and just ask yourself, what if the father had not been on the porch or wherever he was waiting? You get this implication that the father has been watching and waiting all this time. It wasn't that he'd been out in the field and looked up and, oh, there he is. Hey, how about that? But the scripture says, while he was a long way off, the father saw him. What if the father hadn't been waiting? What if he got tired or aggravated like the older son and just said, that's it? I know I've mentioned before that I'd heard in my past in some study somewhere that the Jewish people back in Jesus' day and time had this parable, except the ending was different. The ending was more like the father wasn't waiting and wasn't watching. And the son comes up and knocks on the door. And the father looks up and says, yes, as he opens the door. And the son says, I've come back home. I'm your son. I've come back. And the father says, I have no son. And that is the Jewish sign. They raise his two fingers and he spits between his two fingers to indicate, don't talk to me anymore about this son. And slams the door. But just what if? And I raise this question because had the father not been anxiously watching and waiting, how would the son have approached all this? He was having it in his mind and rehearsing it. I'm going to do this and that. But the actions of the father made the whole process a whole lot easier, you see. We ought to be as anxious as the father is represented in this parable. Anytime anybody's ever coming back. Anytime anybody's away for any period of time, actually, to make sure they're okay when they come back in the door. So anxious that we be like the father. That's part of what's being described here in this relationship. And you see the parable as a parallel between God the Father anxiously awaiting for his people or any persons to return to him. Now the second thing that Craig mentioned that he heard from a Jewish gentleman some time ago was the actual running. You see, mentioned in the parable, and Jesus intentionally says it. He says, while the father saw him afar off, it says he ran to him. He didn't wait. He didn't stand there patting his foot saying, okay, let's get down here, like we might. But he saw him and he knew where he was headed. And he not just met him halfway, but he ran to him. And the point that this man was making to Craig is, older Jewish men don't run. It's a little bit childish and a sign of immaturity. You might walk toward the person, but you carry a step about you that I'm in charge of my life. And so the father casts off all that worries him about what people are thinking because he sees the son and he's filled with emotion and he can't do anything else but run. And what a neat representation Jesus is painting about his Father to us, of how excited he is. Anytime anybody gets close to coming near him, he's just, reaching out for him. And how important that is for us, his people, to establish that in our hearts and not be like the older brother, as you see toward the end of the parable, the additional part that Jesus adds in that's not part of the Jewish thing. The older brother who didn't want to go in. And the father goes out and pleads with him, it says, begs him to come in. What a difference. We're such a blessed people. To have a God that cares that much. To have a church that represents pretty well what's going on there. But just keep nurturing it and strengthening that and make sure we hold it down, because the terror's out there in the world and the refuge is here, and we need to know constantly this is the place to be. This is a place where I can stand strong. This is a place where I belong. And there's a God here in charge. And we follow him. And we do it right. And we do it carefully. So we close this out. We're getting ready to meet and discuss things. And there's a breakout group that'll talk about some of these things in a little more detail, or other things too. But as you're closing out this lesson in your mind, if you need some help, Father's ready. And these brothers and sisters are ready too. Whatever your help need is, would you come while we stand and sing, please?